Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another Freestyle Friday episode of the Build Your Network podcast. And just a couple weeks ago, I dropped an awesome article on Travis's website.
Well, technically, I dropped the article.
Yes.
According to my website.
According to the website,
it's written.
You're a great writer.
Yes.
So,
I'm the author. But we all know now that it was you.
Team Travis dropped an article about some comments Howard Stern made about podcasting. And the comments were from, I think, 2015. And then there were some more comments from a little bit more recently, and kind of just talked about, all respect to where respect is due. Howard Stern's a legend, but some of the things he said about podcasting throughout the years are pretty dumb.
Yeah. To me, what it reminds me of is somebody that had to go through the shit in the beginning of his career. And so now when he sees other people, having success that rivals his own without having gone through that same process, it understandably probably irks him a little bit. It's kind of similar to like Warren Buffett and Bitcoin. You know what I mean? It's like, there's so many other smart people that say Bitcoin's a real thing. It's here to stay and it's going to be around for a long time. But then you have 90-something-year-old Warren Buffett, who's got a couple hundred, or $100+ billion. Having another currency come into the picture, probably is something that he doesn't really like. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean that Bitcoin is bad. It doesn't mean that podcasting is bad. It just means that from their perspective, they went about their careers a certain way. And now other people are seeing massive leaps and bounds from technology that's come up in the last decade in both cases. And it probably, frankly, just upsets them a little bit, which again is understandable, but it doesn't make it right.
Well, there's that. And I think there's also like the survivor bias thing, right? Too, where like you go a certain path and it works for you.
Right.
And then you kind of assume that's the right path for everybody.
Yeah. The only path
forever.
Yeah.
And so I think like from a cynical side, I say like, you get scared when something new is encroaching on your territory. But I think from the other side too, when he tries to give advice around how you should do broadcasting, with the word that he uses, broadcasting, it's based on his own journey,
right? Which
started,
Yeah, so this was April of 2021, I believe.
He refreshed his stance.
Yeah, he did a little bit better. The first one, he goes,
podcasts are fine. You want to make a podcast, sit in your room and make a podcast. You want to make money and become a broadcaster and actually get a following, you've got to put yourself to the test. If you want to be a comedian, you could sit in your room and do your comedy into a microphone, or you could go to a club.
Yeah, you could be the greatest comedian ever, only nobody would know it.
Right. You got to go to a club, and I'm telling you, if you want to become a radio broadcaster and make a living at this and get a following, you've got to go on terrestrial radio, not even satellite. You got to go on terrestrial radio and wait for the ratings book to come out. And you'll find out if you're any good.
So that was back in 2015. He did refresh his stance a little bit. He says nowadays, because they're a podcast and everybody's podcasting on the radio, everybody thinks they know how to do radio. They know how to do talk, but you've never gone on a radio station and had to get ratings. It's nonsense what you're doing, sitting in your house with your podcast. No one is listening to it. No one gives a fuck. Podcasts, I try to listen to some of them. I got the podcast app, and it's a lot of people talking to other people who aren't really that interesting. They're bores. They're effing bores. But no one tells them that they're bores. So he obviously had some...
That's the problem, all right.
Yeah, but that's pretty Stern-like to talk about it like that. That was a bad Stern impression.
Anyway...
You can try again if you want. Just,
I don't want
keep
to.
going.
I don't want to.
I mean, this is just very Stern-esque. Yeah. He that's what he does. He talks shit for a living and divides and polarizes for a living. But the thing is, though, like he's got some stuff right about it. You know what I mean? It's like for the majority of people who are podcasting, they don't do it the right way. Most
Stern's
people will never get a... Yeah, right.
His observations are going to hit in some places.
Yeah. And that's one of them. He's definitely right that a lot of people aren't doing them well and they think they know how to do them well and they wonder why their show doesn't grow. And it's clearly directly correlated to their lack of skill in creating interesting content, or being able to market that content effectively. But yeah, to make these just big broad strokes about the podcasting industry is, just not even based in evidence or fact.
Yeah.
It's just completely not true.
Well, some of the things he gets right, like you said, there's too many people that are doing podcasting without treating it seriously, which I feel douchey just being like, you don't take it seriously, the art of podcasting. But sure. There's truth to that.
You can't not treat it seriously and then expect good results. If you're just, having a good time with your buddies and drinking a beer and talking about the sports game or whatever that you like to follow the most, great, do that. But don't get upset when you don't have Joe Rogan like numbers. Yeah. That you can't have the best of both worlds where you just, I do whatever I want. It's totally fun. And we just don't really focus on anything. We just talk. And it's like, okay, great. But probably nobody's listening because probably, like Stern says, you're not that interesting. And neither are the people that you're talking to or having conversations with. That's what makes Stern's show interesting. That's what makes Joe Rogan interesting, is that like they're both interesting people and they interview interesting people. Yeah. And so the conversations that they can have about quote unquote nothing are far more interesting than like, some random person sitting down talking to their other friend that both work boring jobs and live in boring places and don't do anything interesting. Yeah. It's obviously going to not be a great conversation.
Yeah, there's a good amount of people dicking around, as he says, with podcasts and hoping to get somewhere. And I think there should be more people who are expecting the success, who are working on the craft of interviewing, working on getting good guests. Like even when you look at like a Joe Rogan Experience, which I know we'll bring up that comparison at some point, there's a lot of work in what type of people get brought on and trying to be relevant with conversations. And so,
the thing is with Rogan too, though, is that he also tries to attribute Joe Rogan's fame and success to his traditional television days. Yeah, right.
He didn't land a Joe Rogan Spotify deal.
Yeah, Joe Rogan is famous for one reason: his podcast.
No.
Like he was maybe a C-list celebrity prior to his podcast. He hosted UFC, which at the time nobody watched. Like nobody paid attention to what UFC was. And I dare anybody listening to this right now, unless you're a diehard UFC fan, to name another UFC commentator that is not Joe Rogan. You know what I mean? That's not what made him famous. Fear Factor is not what made him famous. It made him recognizable, but it's not what made him famous.
Even news radio, which is funny because like he's done so many things that would be most people's peak career.
Yeah, right. He just the sitcom.
I was on a sitcom for several years. I was doing UFC.
I hosted a TV show. Right.
And then it's like, the most famous thing is the newest thing, which is podcasting, which is the new radio, essentially.
Yeah, sure. Well, and it really is. It's really just an evolution of radio. Like people say television was the evolution of radio. That's not true. It's just a new medium. Television and radio are not the same medium. They're different. Podcasting is the evolution of radio. And it frankly is a much better form of radio. Right. Like it's international distribution. You know what I mean? Like you don't, there's no gatekeepers. Nobody decides if you're successful or not successful. You can decide that for yourself if you have enough drive in you to go do that. There's a lot of reasons that podcasting is better than radio. And to attribute Joe Rogan's fame and success to like his pre-podcasting days, and that's why he has a successful podcast, to me is just, again, and just a lack of understanding of podcasting. Because you look at, there's so many other actually famous people that tried to start podcasts that did not go well.
Thinking probably the same way, which is like, if Joe Rogan can do it,
right,
I can.
Right.
Well, and look, having that background helps. That's another thing I think Stern's right about is like if Howard Stern started a podcast with the back he has now, sure, he'd do.
Well, Jason Ellis did that.
Right.
Jason Ellis had a Sirius XM show for a long time. They didn't renew it, so he started a new show. And now he has a couple of podcasts. He has one with Tony Hawk that does actually pretty well from what I understand. Yeah. And they can make money doing that. Right. I just think that, I think that he looks at, he's done nothing but try to be a successful broadcaster for his entire career. And he has hit the pinnacle of what that means. And I think that now he sees podcasting as a threat to that, whether consciously or subconsciously. And I think that kind of drives him to look with confirmation bias for the negative things about it and not recognize it for the positive things. Yeah.
Well, so we've talked a little bit about what he's gotten right. And even with that, I think there's some mixed in there that's a little bit off. But what are some of the things he's dead wrong about? Because I mean, first of all, the easy one for me is, if you want to be successful in broadcasting, you have to go to terrestrial radio.
Yeah. I've even heard the term terrestrial radio in like 20 years.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
So,
it's been something that's brought up.
Spot, which to me, and again, I listened to it the first time I heard it. I was just like, oh, this is stupid. And then I tried to listen to it because I do like Howard Stern. I listen to a lot of Howard Stern.
I mean, Howard Stern is the GOAT.
Yeah.
In terms of radio, he is the GOAT. And he's a great interviewer.
So I tried to listen to it with like, okay, am I missing something, some point he's making? And going through and listening, I'm like waiting for a ratings book to tell you if you're good. I was like, you can do that with download numbers and with podcast reviews and with Facebook communities.
Well, here's some ratings right here. So this came out recently. Q3 2021 media ratings, average viewers per show in millions from Nielsen and Spotify. So CNN primetime average is 0.82 in millions, which is pretty crazy. Less than a million per show. CNN primetime.
I gotta say something too on that, just from the advertiser perspective. It's crazy how much money companies put in advertising to be on CNN or Fox.
Right. Well, they think that's the show.
Versus campaigns for podcast. Like that's a totally whole different other conversation I should probably mark down for later. But it's crazy to me. Like companies are spending millions of dollars for 30-second ad spots on CNN when there's podcasts that are, like you're about to read,
reaching bigger audiences.
Way bigger.
Right.
Like 5 times, 10 times, 20 times those audiences. It's just crazy to me. But anyway, sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but that's
So CNN, 820,000, MSNBC primetime average, 1.27, Rachel Maddow, 2.2, Ingram Angle, 2.3, Fox News primetime, 2.3, Hannity, 2.9, The Five, 2.98, Tucker Carlson Tonight, 3.24. So these are all so far traditional media companies, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, and then major anchors that are on those networks. Yeah. Joe Rogan Experience, number 1 at 11 million. 11 million average viewers per show, comparatively to the bottom ranked one, CNN at 820,000. Like over a 10x with a single guy podcasting out of a studio with a desk.
Jamie would like a word.
Yeah, sure.
Two guys.
Yeah. Like,
but it's crazy.
And to do that in a decade, I assume Joe Rogan started his podcast around 2010-ish, sometime in there, maybe a little bit before that. But like to do that in a decade without trying to do it, he says it all the time. Like he was not even trying to do it. He was just trying to, he was trying to have fun with his friends.
They're just goofing off.
Right. And something that we talked about earlier too, like I'm not saying that his prior successes didn't have anything to do with it, but they're definitely not the thing that made him who he is. They just made him better at doing what he did. Right. Like touring the country, doing stand-up comedy and hosting television shows and being on TV. All of those things make him a better communicator. They make him a funnier host. They make him able to connect with people of all shapes and sizes and colors and ethnicities and backgrounds and career fields. Like he's talked to so many people. He has high emotional intelligence. He can hold a conversation about almost anything with almost anyone. And a lot of that came from his prior backgrounds, but it's not why he's successful. Right. There's a lot more to unpack with why he is successful in particular. So there's a couple of things there. Another one that Stern gets wrong is he said, as we know it right now, there's no way to congregate a mass audience around podcasting unless you already have an audience.
And this was from April. This is when he renewed his, which isn't true. And like I included in the article, I think. But I'll just say from my experience, I was a nobody when I started my show. Like I'm still a nobody relatively, but in my niche, like nobody knew who I was. Like nobody outside of my network knew who I was. Like that show on YouTube alone last year was like 800,000 views on YouTube, together with my podcast, like 1.6 million views of my content, at least 30 seconds of it, which is like, that's crazy numbers for somebody who is using a USB microphone in a bedroom, at a desk. Like that's crazy to me.
That type of distribution from no marketing dollars.
It's not like it's like, oh, people knew me from when I was like a marketing coordinator at an auto group.
Right. You don't have the booth at the local farmer's market with 103.6 and like tune into your hosts or whatever.
A radio voice. But that was another one that just stood out like crazy. It's like there's literally
it's just completely dead wrong. Yeah, it's totally dead wrong.
And your show too. I mean,
Nobody knew who I was at all before I started my show. And again, we're not like famous people, but I've gotten a couple million downloads on a show from absolutely nothing with nobody knowing who I was or giving a shit about what I talked about before.
Which I think leads directly into the last thing I think he's dead wrong about, which is, if you want to make money, you have to be doing traditional radio.
Yeah. You can't make real money.
Well, you just
podcasting.
Said neither of us are super famous. And anybody watching that would agree. Nobody's going to argue the other side of that.
Right.
We're not famous, but both of us have made a decent amount of money podcasting.
Yeah.
If you want to look at, the Guestio logo behind you, all of the funding for Guestio came from relationships through the podcast. We can directly track, a lot of money back to the podcast.
If you look at the money that we've raised and the money that we generated through the business in the last couple of years, just as much money as downloads, over a couple $1 million in the last couple of years, been all generated directly through the podcast, which that's not FU money and that's not Stern money. Right.
That's nothing.
But yeah, that's my question is you can't make real money podcasting. You said define real money because the average radio talk show host in the country makes $30,000 a year. Median salary $30,960. That's not real money. I know that. That's barely above the poverty line. You know what I mean?
We're crushing it.
I don't know.
As the average radio host, we're in the top 1% of radio hosts versus
without having to go through a gatekeeper, without having to go to school for broadcasting, without having to be the janitor at the local radio station and hopefully get some airtime where I play a song and go, and now the 3s and 1s and blah, blah, blah. And here you go. Here's a song. And then hopefully somebody hears my voice and goes, that guy has talent, and then gives me a shot. Right. And then 12 years later, after I work through 13 different radio stations in submarkets of submarkets, hopefully one day I can get a 6-figure salary in 18 years from now that will lead to a national syndicated radio deal. No, this all happened in 4 years from my bedroom in my spare bedroom. You know what I mean? Yours been less than that, so it just is unequivocally incorrect. And I don't know if he's just choosing to ignore that or if it just frankly doesn't give a shit.
Well, he doesn't need to, that's the thing is at the end of the day, he's got his deal. It's the same as Warren Buffett.
Right. Exactly.
Warren Buffett can be dead wrong about crypto. It doesn't matter.
Right. And why would Warren Buffett give credibility to something that has the potential to discredit the thing that he owns the most of, which is dollars? Yeah. You know what I mean? It's why would he? He's 94. You know what I mean? What is he going to do? Become the Bitcoin oracle? He was the Oracle of Wall Street or whatever they call him. Probably not. He's probably just going to be Bitcoin sucks. Peace. You know what I mean? He doesn't have to do anything different than that. And he knows it's not going to take over in his lifetime. Yeah. You know what I mean? So why give it any sort of additional steam? Yeah. I think that Howard Stern is kind of the same way. He's just I did my own thing. I just think that, he's right. The barrier to entry is really low, and that creates a lot of opportunity, but it also creates a lot of crappy shows. Mm-hmm. But I think that those shows, a lot of them get weeded out anyway. Mm-hmm. I was reading recently, there's over 3 million indexed podcasts now between Spotify and Apple Podcasts. But less than 500,000 of them have released an episode in the last 90 days. So still a small percentage of shows that are continuously releasing episodes. And I think that's because a lot of people suck. And when you suck, it's not something that you want to just continue sucking at. If you're doing it for any length of time, you're probably doing a better job. You're trying to learn to get better. You're bringing on better guests. You're talking about better content. You're trying to monetize. You're trying to grow. You're doing a little bit of something right, or else you probably wouldn't continue podcasting. So I think that it's going to continue to kind of weed itself out anyway.
Well, look, I think it's undeniable, and it's going to keep, the more he doubles down the comments, I think the more it's going to stand out, how glaringly wrong some of this is. And, if he wants to ever come on the podcast,
100%.
More than
the thing is, he's still Howard Stern, and everything that we just said,
he's still a freaking legend.
Exactly. Everything that we just said lives in the shadow of Howard Stern. Yeah. He's like we said, the goat of terrestrial radio,
satellite too, and satellite radio,
and now satellite radio. Yeah. But to say that it's not, what you pointed out in the article, or what I so cleverly pointed out in the article, is that SiriusXM purchased Stitcher for $325 million recently. Stitcher's a podcast app. Yeah, that's literally all it does.
His own home network is investing, spending more than they spend on him.
To buy three times as much as they spend on him to buy an app, not even a personality, just an app that has podcasts on it, which you can get on like 50 other different apps, but they saw enough value in that to pick it up. You know, it just, like you said, I don't think he'll ever change his opinion on it. I think he's just going to, keep dumping on it and then retire a wealthy and happy man, which good for him.
Good for him.
Yeah. Good for him. Good for you, Howard Stern.
If you're listening to this episode, Howard Stern, you're free to come on. If you're listening to this episode, though, be sure to check us out on social media at Travis Chappell on Instagram. Drop your thoughts if you agree, especially if you disagree. I'd be curious to hear if there's anyone listening to this podcast that would disagree with any of the points made. Or if you're on YouTube,
probably
drop a
only
comment.
if they're on the radio as well.
Yeah. If you're hearing this on the radio, I don't know how it got there, but thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Peace.